Good morning. Today we continue working and studying the movement of suffragettes. People, women who fought for women's right to vote. What was a suffragette? A suffragette was a person who campaigned for the right of women to vote. The term itself comes from the word suffrage, which means right to vote. Did not words was the mantra they used to fight their battles. This is a picture which appeared on the newspapers of that time, making fun of these women fighting. In fact, it's displayed suffragettes who have never been kissed. So men made fun of this activism. Let's have a deeper look at the storyline of the events that you already know, thanks to the video I shared with you last week. So, the Votes for Women movement exploded in the UK in 1903, but the story of the campaign begins before the reign of Queen Victoria. In 1832, the Great Reform Act extended the franchise, but it didn't use the word women, neither the word people. It just used the word male, excluding, in fact, women from the vote. In 1847, the first leaflet advocating for women's vote appeared. 20 years later, in the 1867, with the Reform Act, vote was still based around property qualifications. That defeat led to the founding in 1897 of the National Union of Women's Suffrage. The following year, Richard Pankhurst, who was a member of the parliament, tried hard to win votes for women, but nothing happened. What happened was that his wife and his daughter, Emmeline and Christopher, went on to become the two most important figures of the movement. On the 10th of October 1903, the Women's Social and Political Union was born, and its members soon will be named or nicknamed the Suffragettes. During the inaugural meeting, the inaugural party of the WSPU, they declared that the situation was so serious and it would have to pursue, to follow, to use extreme measure of civil disobedience. So women began chaining themselves to railings, and within 5 years, the campaign had extended to smashing windows. The most determined and the first to be jailed, the first to be put to prison, were Christabel Pankhurst and Annie Kennedy. They disrupted a Liberal Party meeting and got themselves arrested, and then refused to pay fines, so their jailing created headlines on the newspaper of the time.
Incident is running third from last.
What you have just watched was one of the most important and impacting act of civil disobedience that the suffragettes led, especially Emily Davidson. She died at Derby when she rushed out to bring down the king's horse. You could have seen it in the video quite well. And another example happened in 1911 when the UK had witnessed the first act of suffragette arson fire, organized by Christabel. Prisons start to be filled with women prepared to go to jail for the right to vote. Civil disobedience continued behind bars, behind bans, behind the limit imposed to women, and many of them were force-fed since they started hunger strike. Hunger strike means that they refused to eat, they refused food just to campaign against that society. But the authorities nevertheless tried to force feeding them, and you will see it in one of the next slide.
Alternative. Defy this government.
We shall cut into the heart of communications.
My job is to enforce the law.
It all means nothing to me. I've had no say in making the law.
We have reached a state of anarchy we can no longer ignore. Punish those responsible, in whatever way you can.
That you just saw was an example of civil disobedience, so women striking windows with stones, shouting deeds, not words. And this is an image published in 1909 where you can see how women were force-fed by public officers. But lastly, we came to a point in which the rights of women started to be recognized step by step. And one of the most important milestones in this story, in this battle, was the arrival of the First World War. In fact, the First World War was the turning point for their activism, for their campaign. In fact, in this moment, the suffragettes stopped their campaign because they understood that during that time they had to help the nations, to help their nation, during the war. So national unity became the priority. But as men went to the Western Front to fight, the women stayed at home and proved how indispensable they were in the fields and armaments factories. So since men were at the front, somebody had to continue working, and that's where women started to have to gain their importance. Women began working in munitions factory, and by the end of the war, almost 800,000 women were working in them, and they proved they were just as skilled, as capable as men. As the war went on, more women started to work in men's job as bus conductors or postal workers, as you can see in the picture. So a kind of social revolution started and took the place of the active revolution and the active riots. Finally, in 1918, the Representation of People Act allowed women over 30 the right to vote. But there were still some property prerequisites. It would take further 10 years to abolish the age qualification and put men and women on equal level, on an equal footing. The suffragette movement was one of the few political movements in the history of Britain to cut across all classes. It was the first political movement to involve women from different social classes because all together were fighting for the same right. Many of the upper middle class women, in fact, were jailed together during the suffragette protest, and so they found themselves sharing prison with the poorest in society. And here we come to an end. I say an end on purpose because women over 21 were able to vote and finally achieved the same voting rights as men. But as I said and as I repeat, this was just an end. There was just an objective achieved. Since today we still have women fighting to extend the rights in our societies, but also all over the world. I mean, in our Western societies and in other part of the world. We can conclude saying that the suffragettes started with the voting right for women, and those first steps have taken us on a much bigger journey. A lot has changed in 100 years, but the legacy of empowering future generations continues. And some examples can be seen in Malala, Hillary Clinton, and many more who are still fighting. Keep up the good work. Modern suffragettes.